Is Sunday only faith leaving our church families spiritually lazy? We're talking about that today on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, AJ Matthew. AJ, last week, you were not with me. I did the podcast all by myself, and I have an observation about...
You loved it? It was easier and more fun?
No, actually, no, none of that. I was going to say, I realized that... when I'm not talking to you on the podcast, when it's just me and the camera and my audience, I've become NPR Scott.
Yeah.
I'm like, so here's what I'm thinking today. Like, tenor of my voice drops.
Yeah.
I'm afraid of being too loud. I think I'm afraid of blowing out the audio or something. So for everyone who listened last week and got NPR Scott, regular Scott is back because I'm speaking to my friend and co-host, AJ Matthew. So welcome back from Mexico. Glad to have you back. It is much easier to talk about a topic with you. This is my preferred method for recording the podcast.
Me too. Yeah, glad to be back. It's weird to not do this for a week, but and Mexico was awesome, so that was good. Thank you to everybody that supported that trip. That was really cool. How I didn't hear last week's episode, Scott. How long did it go?
What?
How long did you talk by yourself?
Did you say talk about myself? I didn't
talk by yourself. How long did
okay.
you talk by yourself? Yeah.
How long do you think that episode was?
I don't know. Our average episode is about 38 minutes. So I don't know. Am I holding you back? Did you go 41 minutes without me?
Let's see. It was longer than that. You know me, I can talk for forever. So I had a lot to say. How long was it? I'm just double checking. It was 47 minutes.
Oh boy. Well,
you're welcome, everyone. We won't be that long today. Famous last words. Let's dive into what are we talking about?
Yeah. Apathy is one of the chief issues and concerns of pastors today. It's coming out in statistics that we read. It's in the feedback that we get. And so we do want to try to, have a relevant podcast. And so we want to be able to talk about apathy from time to time, and maybe more often than we used to, from various angles. And so that's where we're at today. And we're framing this up around a quote unquote Sunday only faith. Programmatic churches that just like, come on Sunday, here's what we're going to do every week, come worship. Maybe you go to Sunday school, the kids go do their thing. We go home. We don't think about that again until the following Sunday. And so, what can we do?
I mean, I think some people are probably going, if only everyone showed up every Sunday, that would be amazing.
For sure. Yeah. Every other Sunday, or maybe like one Sunday a month is more.
One Sunday a month only faith.
Yeah, right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So just thinking about what if we changed our focus? What if we looked at what we do as a church through the lens of, this integrated faith in our families as we go through life, Sunday to Sunday. Are there some minor tweaks we can make? I think there are. I think we've got some suggestions that I think if our church leadership, again, changes the lens that we put in front of our face whenever we're deciding how can we best disciple our people, then this is great. And we work with a lot of churches, and the majority of churches have got its families, children of various ages in multi-generational churches. So how can we best work through the entire family unit as we are thinking about discipling people to their greatest maturity?
Yeah. Okay. So let's let's talk about the problem sort of explicitly. The problem is we have families who are busy or perceive themselves to be busy. Whether or not you think that's true, they think it's true. They've got, soccer practice and t-ball and, on top of school and work, and both parents very often now working, whereas maybe 30 years ago, maybe it was more common to have only one parent working. Now it's almost impossible to survive in this high inflation economy without having two working parents. Not totally impossible, but it's obviously more rare to have an at-home parent. So that does increase the burden then and the sense of pressure. So this is the environment that is. I think always the first thing you have to start with is, this is the reality. This is the constraint. You can say it shouldn't be. You can disagree with it. You can long for days past, but you have to start with the reality. The reality is people are, or at least perceive themselves to be, busier than they were. So then the response to this that most churches have is, one of two things typically. One would be throw up your hands and just say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. And they don't change anything. They don't do anything different. And they just whine about it and say, this is so terrible. And then those churches decline and eventually close. This can be a process that takes many years or decades. Another common response is, well, if we were just to make what we're doing on campus attractive enough, then people would reorient their schedules to make more time to be on campus. And this, to me, I think is the fatal, flawed assumption. I get it. You're thinking a spiritually mature person would prioritize being at church more often.
Yeah.
That assumes spiritual maturity is not there. So the assumption is flawed to begin with, AJ. We have churches that go, we just need to, give our programs a little more, I think what the kids call Riz. Is that a thing that the kids say? Can a thing have Riz, or only a person?
Is Riz it? Or is
it's Riz.
It's Riz?
It's short for charisma.
Charisma. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Sure.
Trying to keep up with the times, but it's very difficult. At any rate, I think we think if we just had some more razzle dazzle on our programs and they were more attractive, then people would reorient their schedules. And that's just not true. There's an even deeper false assumption that even if we did create a program that people would reorient their schedules for, that would be the thing that leads to transformation. And that's also a false, flawed assumption. So what I was trying to do in this article, and what we're trying to do in this episode today, is to challenge those baseline assumptions. What is it that we're trying to accomplish in the first place? And then what could we do that would effectuate the outcome that we're designing for? And so this is all still introduction here, but it's really important because I think the introduction almost is the heart of this, because we're going to give you some very practical ideas of things that you could do, but the ideas will make no sense if we're not sort of rooted in this fundamental question of why would we do things differently in the first place. So AJ, I know this is a topic you're passionate about. Let's talk a little bit about, before we get into these specific ideas, this idea of designing for outcomes, discipleship outcomes versus designing for attendance.
Yeah, I think the lens that we need to be looking at is how are we maturing people, and what exactly does that even look like? Aubrey used to say, what if a mature Christian walked through the door, how would you recognize them? Well, you wouldn't by watching them walk through the door, but you would recognize them by the actions and the behaviors that they engaged in. And we see some core behaviors in Acts chapter 2 that we talk about a lot, and especially when we talk core values in the church and then building a discipleship pathway. So you would expect, if you knew somebody in your church, and you will know somebody when I describe them, they're engaged in worship, they're active pursuers of worship for God. They have great prayer life. They're in fellowship with believers. They're generous. They share their faith. They're studying God's word for greater understanding. When you put these things together, the sum total of them, you likely would go, that person has matured in their faith. This is kind of what we're looking at. So,
or is maturing, right?
Is maturing. We're always on that path, that never-ending path of sanctification. So, this is the lane in which I say this a lot when we're working with churches. The church needs to be in its lane. And the church's lane is providing an opportunity for people to engage in behaviors that will lead to greater spiritual maturity. We cannot force them into maturity. We cannot produce fruits of the Spirit in them. We can only cultivate an environment in which hopefully the Spirit will work within them, which happens outside of church also, by the way. I understand how that works. But we can only cultivate an environment, like the best case scenario, for them to mature in their faith. And that includes how we ask them to spend their time. And so that's kind of where we're at with this. The things that we ask people do and the environment that we create is at best for helping parents and children in all age groups to engage in things that will have produce the greatest spiritual fruit. And so, yeah, I think we've got a pretty good little list here, Scott, in a few different categories. And we're not going to go through all of them today on this. So go to malfirstgroup.com/205 after. Don't do it while you're driving. And you can read more about some of these other little ideas that we've thrown out. I think they're pretty good.
Yeah, so let me kind of break that down. We've created 3 categories. Well, we have what can we do on campus that might be different from what we're doing right now. So we're not eliminating the on-campus environment. There's no such thing as doing the Christian life totally remotely, right? You've got to be in community. So there are, I think, some on-campus things we could be doing different from what we've been doing historically. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And there are 3 ideas there in the article. We're also going to talk about the at home. How can you be equipping parents for things that they can do at home to be discipling themselves and to discipling their kids? We've got 3 ideas for that. We're going to talk about one of them on the podcast, and then you can read the other 2 in the article. And then we're going to talk about online. So what are some digital things that we could be doing to enhance discipleship? And again, these things are supplements to what's happening in person, not replacements for what's happening in person. But when we are focused on the outcomes, rather than assuming that if we can just get people here 3 days a week, that's going to produce a mature disciple. I mean, I don't think we could even assume that. Mm-hmm. Then we have a little bit more freedom to start thinking more creatively and holding ourselves to that standard of transformation. So let's start with on campus. What's something that we should be doing?
You choose, Scott. You choose. Okay. Which one of these you want to talk about?
Okay. All right. So like I mentioned, there's 3 ideas in the article. All right. We got three ideas in the article, but I'm just going to talk about one. But I love this idea of kid-parent Bible studies. So a common challenge for midweek stuff is that parents will come drop their kids off for midweek programming, and then they go grab some coffee or have some free babysitting for 90 minutes. There are some certain percentage of people who come and they go to a Bible study or a class, an adult one, or they cut out and go to an adult home group or something and then come back and pick their kids up. That's good. But those percentage hits are often pretty low. So the attendance and engagement for kids is higher than for adults. So one idea is to do a kid-parent Bible study in which kids and parents come together. They hear some family-oriented teaching. So it's kind of taught at a level that hits for a short period of time and then split up. So then parents go to break out in one way, kids break out in age-appropriate groups another way, and that allows then for more dialogue between the parents and the kids about the topic, which is equipping parents. Very often parents feel unequipped to talk about spiritual things with their kids, or like, or you'll say to your kid, what did you learn about in Sunday school today? And the kid will go, nothing, and then you don't know what to do. So by having this shared experience together where you're talking about the same things together, that empowers parents to have, even if it's just an inch deeper spiritual conversation with their kids. And if you've gone to church your whole life, you might think it's not hard to have spiritual conversations with your kids. Trust me, most people feel very intimidated about having spiritual conversations with their kids. So this is, I think, a really good midweek opportunity, or a Sunday evening opportunity, or some non-Sunday morning opportunity to equip parents to disciple their kids.
Yeah. I love these kind of integrated things, where everybody's studying the same thing, and it has to be scaled sometimes, for levels of understanding. But it's not usually hard. I mean, if you can produce something at the highest level, it's usually pretty easy to kind of back that off for, younger ages and lower understanding. So, yeah, I think it's so great. That makes it way easier, because I've been in these environments in churches that do this. It makes it way easier then to go, hey, I know we were talking about John the Baptist this week, and here's kind of what we said in our class. What did you think about this thing or that thing? So yeah, instead of the I don't know, I don't remember what we did.
I don't know.
I know exactly what you did, and you better start talking.
Exactly. Or even just to be able to have that vulnerability and say, here's something that I learned about John the Baptist. Rather than having to see yourself as the expert, you go, hey, here's something that I didn't know, or I had forgotten, or something I learned.
Yeah.
What's something that you learned that you didn't know before?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be complicated. So I like this idea. I don't see a lot of it. I mean, I've worked with dozens and dozens and dozens of churches. I can't think of one off the top of my head. I'm sure I maybe have worked with a few, but I can't think of one off the top of my head where they were doing a really good job of doing some sort of parent-child integrated programming on campus. Can't think of one off the top of my head. So I think this is an untapped idea.
It's freak. I mean, yeah, I've had this conversation. The most frequent, barrier is who's going to create that? Who's going to create curriculum that we could do across, all the generational spaces? So that's the biggest pushback.
Stay tuned. We have some ideas that might be able to help you with that.
Stay tuned to a future episode of the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Yeah, we're working on that problem. Yeah.
All right, Scott. All right, so that covered. That was just one of the suggestions in the on campus. We're going to move into at-home family discipleship. What do you want to hit on this one? What do you like?
Okay, there are I actually like all three of the ideas that are in here, but I'm going to hit one that is something that I'm just starting doing. So I want to. You can always count on the Church Revitalization Podcast, Scott Ball, to be transparent with you. And I've been disappointed in myself, and feel like my kids are 10 and 8, and their biblical literacy is, I think, significantly lower than I would like for it to be. Doesn't do any good to be embarrassed about that or whatever, but I just go, man, occasionally I'll have a dialogue with them and go, you don't understand this concept or remember this story particularly well or whatever. And these are things that I just take for assumptions. And I think part of that, not to get too into the weeds, but I went to Christian school growing up, private Christian school when I was in elementary school. So I was in Bible every day. We had Bible class, on top of Sunday school. So the amount of time that I spent saturated in this stuff from a very young age is much higher than my kids' exposure, in what we talk about at home, plus what they're getting in Sunday school. Throw in a pandemic, where for a while we weren't going in person to church. I mean, that set them back. So not making any excuses. I'm taking full ownership and I'm saying, hey, something needs to be different, and I need to raise the biblical literacy of my kids, because ultimately my church is not accountable for my kids. You know, when I stand before Jesus, I'm responsible for what did I teach my kids about the Lord. So one of the things is an idea that's in the article, and it's something that I'm doing, is I have a 7-minute drive from my house to my kids' school every day in the morning. It's crazy. If we try to do something, very often the evenings are hectic, and everyone's exhausted. No one wants to have a conversation in the evenings, because they're all tired. And if before we leave for school, it's insanity. I have 7 minutes with my kids where things are relatively calm. We're driving to school. I'm leveraging that conversation to share, even something like today we were talking about Noah's Ark, which is a very basic story, but I was trying to connect these themes back to Jesus a little bit. Like, we see that when Noah comes off the ark. Yeah, well, I know, but I'm saying, like, when Noah comes off the ark, I'm trying to, I guess, maybe hit themes that maybe they wouldn't have covered in Sunday school. Like the idea that when Noah and his family come off the ark, it takes all of 5 minutes to realize that Noah and his family are just as evil as the people that all just got wiped out. And so it reinforces this need for a different solution. Killing everyone is not the ultimate solution to the problem of human sin. And we need a savior. And so we talked about that today. And so what if you equipped parents with car line habits? Some sort of, you could give them a card with a scripture to read, and let the kids take turns, like have a Bible that's in the back seat and have the kids take turns, maybe just a couple of verses. Again, I got 7 minutes. We couldn't read 2 chapters or something, but just a couple of verses. Let the kids take turns reading it and then talking about it. What do you see? What is this story about? What's happening here? How does this point to Jesus? And just leveraging that conversation. One of the things that you'll hear the most from parents these days is they'll complain about the amount of time that they spend in the car, driving their kids to this event or that event, or this program or this obligation. And maybe we should start leveraging these instead of wasting them.
Yeah.
And what if we could equip parents to do that well? So I've been talking for a little while. I'd love your feedback on this. I know you're in a different phase of life than I am, but gosh, I'm like, I've racked my brain, AJ, on when do I carve out the time? It's important to me, but even I'm having a hard time figuring out, when do I have these conversations? And I thought 7 minutes. I have it every day. I should be taking advantage of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think starting young, especially, you could form some really great habits doing that for sure. Your kids haven't reached the headphones age, their teen years where you get in the car and they're tuned out. So I think starting young, that could definitely be a benefit. But I think a lot of kids are willing to take their headphones off still, though, for a reasonably engaging conversation. So I mean, my kids are older than your kids, or twice as old as your kids. Pretty much exactly twice as old as your kids, as of 2023. So I mean, for us, we think, I think, they can hear you just part of the conversation, right, Alex? What do you think? Alex, you try to yell, and huh, what? Huh? So
yeah. Exactly. Well, and what's interesting is you might think your kids will think this is lame, but if their level of Bible literacy is pretty low, which again, I'm embarrassed to say my kids, it's just not where it should be. At least the way I'm telling these stories and explaining these things to them, they're riveted. Like, if you grew up in church, think about what competency bias you might have. But imagine
Yeah.
if you, again, especially if your kids are my kids' ages, their lives were torpedoed for 2 years by the pandemic. They're way behind. I mean, that's the other thing. I'm
Mhm.
trying to like go, okay, my kids are behind, and I didn't do what I should have done during the pandemic. I take full ownership for all that. I'm taking responsibility. We're going to work on these things, but imagine if you've not heard or understood these stories.
Yeah.
They're incredible,
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
you know, and they're my kids are like, they're locked in. They're,
Yeah.
what happened? Why? You know, they're getting it. So I'm,
Yeah. I think you need to experiment a little bit, and I think you need to not give up too quickly, because I know even for us, the drive home from church, if we begin to have some engaging conversation, again, my kids are older teens and now 20, um, so I mean they're hearing the same sermon that I'm hearing, but if you can just find the right questions to ask, and sometimes you got to dig around a little bit, and it can end up having a really engaging conversation on the drive home from church, which obviously could be replicated driving anywhere. So I think this is a go, man. I think this is worth a try, and it's worth the effort. And again, your church,
if you can make it easier, if you can make it
yes,
easier for parents to have these, equip them with something.
right? Yep,
Don't
exactly.
I've got an initiative. I'm going to do this on my own. Most parents, even if they wanted to, they wouldn't know where to start.
Yeah.
So give them a tool.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, it's a good one. This is just one of those simple tweaks you can make, I think, to your life that even, I mean, that's 7 minutes. Hey, that's an hour. You got an hour a week. I mean, if instead you're like, hey, parents, can you find can you carve out an hour a week? Can you plan an hour? And they'd be like, really, an hour? That sounds like a long time. And when am I going to do that? And you're like, how about 7 minutes a day? Can we do that? 14 minutes a day, round trip to school. So it's doable. But the other thing is, don't beat yourself up when you miss one of those. Just get back on the horse. You're like, oh gosh, we got 3 of these done this week. Okay, so do 3 next week, do 4, do 5.
That's 3 more than you did last week, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Okay. All right. Our last category is the online family discipleship ideas. Scotty, which one are you going for on this?
Okay. So we're going to keep with the car theme.
Okay.
Unintentionally. This is, of the 3 ideas, this is my favorite from this category.
This is, I think there's some fun ideas that could be had here. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's the idea of creating a family-oriented podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So my kids, I've mentioned this before, they think it's hilarious that we have this podcast, me and you, AJ.
Yeah.
They also have mistakenly thought that I'm famous.
Uh-huh. You're famous to me, Scott. You're famous to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think they think if you can be found on the internet, you're famous.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the whole of it. So if you're listed, if you have a YouTube channel, it doesn't matter if you've got 10 subscribers or 1 subscriber, you are as famous as Mr. Beast. Like that's the extent of it. At any rate,
Taylor Swift and there's Scott Ball, and they're
in their brain, exactly. I'm famous to them.
That's all that matters.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a bigger deal to them in their life than Taylor Swift is. So, all right. So, family-oriented podcast. I love this. If you, the reason I was bringing up our podcast is even despite the fact that my kids think it's cool that this podcast exists, they would never want to listen to it because it's not built for them, and most podcasts are not built for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so my kids hate it when I turn on the radio or anything that isn't just music. What if you created a weekly family-oriented podcast where there's, again, the same kind of thing like we were talking about with the on-campus thing, where there's some sort of teaching that's very quick. I'm talking 5 to 10 minutes maximum, that is geared at like the 8th grade reading level. so it catches adults and kids can also grasp it. And then you include some interactive elements, like my kids love when we go on road trips, we will download some trivia podcasts, like Disney trivia or whatever. But there's these interactive elements to it where you're pausing and you're saying, well, what do you think? And they love that. They'll ask to listen to that. So creating some interactive elements like that in a family-oriented podcast that you could listen to once a week, and it's again sparking a spiritual conversation or teaching them something that they don't know, a theme, a concept, a Bible story, and it's again equipping parents to disciple their children.
Yeah,
you had a good idea, AJ, of like including kids.
Yeah, that I think that might take it to the pro level, and real. I think that would increase engagement. But yeah, I mean, if you had like an elementary one, and whoever the host is, or multiple hosts, have a kid, like,
maybe one of their kids if they've got kids that age.
Sure, yeah. If kids could hear a kid's voice, someone in their peer group on it, to me that would be pro level. And you could do one for, then like a junior high-ish, preteen, early teen, and then a high school one. So man, I think that would be pretty cool, and I think that would really increase engagement that kids would give it.
Totally. And
these are easier to do than you might think. This isn't.
I was just about to say the barrier for entry to this is so low. You might think it's complicated or you need thousands of dollars of equipment. You do not. You can buy a couple of decent microphones off Amazon for, if you had two of them for what, under a couple $100.
Yeah.
For something decent. And then you plug it in. We do this through Zoom. We record on Zoom, and then we export it out, and you can use some free audio software. Or since we do the video version of this also, I use Premiere Pro, but you wouldn't even have to use
You're starting to speak Greek. There's a 20-something in your church right now that could help you start a podcast.
I guess I was saying there's almost no cost. I'm not going to say no cost. I'm going to say almost no cost. And even the technical ability that's required is minimal.
Yeah.
You could edit this podcast, AJ. You don't
edit it?
Yeah.
I'm sure I could figure out how to edit it. I'm not. I probably could.
You don't edit it, but you could. So I love this idea though of, hey, that's a digital thing that you can do. And then we've got a couple other ideas in here as well. There are 9 total ideas in this article, and we've just covered 3 of them. So you should definitely go on website.
66% more content online at malfersgroup.com/205. All right. Well, there you go. Some a holistic framework for family discipleship. So let's see what we can do. Let's try to move beyond the apathy, the Sunday to Sunday hamster wheel, the Groundhog Day effect that so much of life has on the families in our churches, and just let's try to break out of that. And along the way, let's try to integrate more of a faith experience for all of us to mature, regardless of age. A holistic life surrendered to Christ is what we're truly called to do. And so I think taking advantage of technology and the lifestyle and culture that we find around us is imperative of us as leaders in the church. So we've got to be looking for new ideas and new ways of doing that to engage people at that level. Thanks for being with us this week. We're sure glad you were here. If you're over there reading that article at malfersgroup.com/205, click on that donate button at the top too, or just click on the contact to be able to reach out and start a conversation. We'd love to be a ministry partner with your church. There's a lot more to the Malfers Group than producing a podcast. We're ministering to leaders around the world to build the church, and we need your support to do that. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next week.